Hola, buenos días. Bienvenidos a un otro episodio de Django Chat. Soy Carlton Gibson y tengo con siempre mi amigo Will Vincent. Hola, Will.
Hola, Carlton.
¿Cómo estás? Bien, sí. Y hoy tenemos un invitado muy especial, José Padilla. Hola, José, ¿cómo estás?
Hola, ¿cómo estamos?
Sí, muy bien, muy bien. Let's do the rest in English.
Yep.
Jose, we're thrilled to have you on. You and I have met a couple times, and I think I first became aware of you through your work with JWT, so Django REST Framework. So do you have a quick background on, obviously Carlton and I know about your work in Django, but what's the quick take on your involvement in the Django community?
So I spent some time building a product called Blimp. We were a small team building a project management software, and I remember our first MVP was actually built in Flask and like MongoDB. And after failing doing that, right, we switched back to Django. It was probably Django 1.2, and so I spent at least around 5 years working with Python and Django. So I had a chance to kind of help maintain Django REST Framework and kind of pick up helping maintaining other libraries like PyJWT. And through that, I've worked on random other bits and pieces. And by far, Python keeps being my favorite community.
Yeah, well, we'll link in the show notes, but I remember seeing you gave, was it 2014 to DjangoCon, you gave a talk on JWTs, which I think was your first time at a Django conference. Is that right?
That's right, yeah. I think that went well. I didn't actually give that talk anywhere else, probably in another Python meetup, but not in a conference. What I most liked about that talk was how, at that time, visually explaining what a JSON Web Token is. I think I did a good job at that, and kind of tying that up to authentication with Django REST Framework and Django.
You know, I have to say, Jose, because you were working on Django REST Framework for just ages and ages and years. We were there, and you were an absolute machine maintaining the framework. You know, I mean, maybe you're doing it part of your work, you know, so you had the time, but you were there, you know, making the fixes, doing the updates, you know, absolute rock for years.
Thank you. That means a lot coming from you, definitely. And I don't looking back. I think what I contributed the most at that time was kind of the story around third-party extensions, and you know how that story fit into Django REST Framework and Django, and you know the whole Python community as a whole. But yeah, it was definitely not part of my job. It's just a free time kind of thing.
Right. Okay.
But I definitely was glad I was able to help out with things like that.
Yeah, no, and you would, you know, absolute stalwart. But that's an interesting point you made about the third-party extensions, because it's something that in Django REST Framework we were really keen on, and still are keen on, because we have very limited time and limited bandwidth to maintain stuff. And so someone comes along with a new feature idea, and it's like, well, first of all, can we put that into a third-party package that contributor can maintain themselves? Because that keeps the core maintainable, right?
Yep.
So what was Blimp? What was the quick take on that? What that service was?
So we were kind of 3 people working at that project, and we got together one day, and we were just thinking of things we could possibly build a product around. We had all worked in kind of digital agencies and marketing firms and things like that, where mostly they were using Basecamp, first version of Basecamp at that point. So we had really strong opinions about how project management should look like and should work like, especially in that creative environment, small teams. So we proposed a structured kind of process through product management. So we had a really nice niche. We were targeting small teams like ours, 3, 4, 5 people. Most work was around the actual tasks. So we, Basecamp had messaging, and people would just do project management via messaging, which is via email. We kind of forced you to use our proposed flow. And then, at some point, Trello came up, Asana came up, and
Right.
they were way bigger than us. And eventually, like it made sense for us to just shut it down and focus on other things.
Right. Okay. What was the run there? Because that was 5-year period. You say?
Yeah, like at least 5, 6.
But that's a good run, right? For a startup that you've a small team that you're
Definitely.
running your own show.
We didn't take money. It was completely bootstrapped. We got together and made it happen. We learned a lot through the way through the whole period, and there were definitely like really good opportunities for other things to pop up. One of them being this side project I still maintain called File Previews.
Yeah, I wanted to ask about, or you and I have spoken about it, but I think it's a really interesting project. So what's the quick take on it? And then we can dive into the tech stack, because that's interesting.
So we were building at Blimp, we had like a file section, and you could upload files, right? Share them. And you could upload revisions to files. And once we designed the whole thing, we noticed that we were kind of missing pretty thumbnails for files. So if you upload a JPEG or a PNG, that's easy. If you upload like a Word document, that's a little bit harder. If you upload a Photoshop file or Illustrator file, that becomes harder. So we kind of built this pipeline where you could upload basically any kind of file, and we would just output some PNGs, and that was harder than it sounds. So we from the get-go, we kind of built that separate to Blimp as a separate service, and we after we built it and we were using it, we noticed that we could just put a landing page on it, put a pay button in it, and other people might buy it. And surprisingly, it outlived Blimp as a product.
Right.
It's been going on, and I kind of took over it after we decided to shut down Blimp, the product.
But that's great, because that's like the original microservice, right? It's
right. Yeah,
5 years before the book, 5 years before the meme. It's like, it's a microservice.
And so what's the tech stack? Or how much can you tell us about the architecture of it?
So it's built with Django, obviously. It does have a simple API, so that's Django REST Framework. We use Celery pretty extensively. We are using Redis as our broker, Postgres as our database. We host our workers on pretty hefty EC2 instances, and our API is actually still in Heroku. It gives me an opportunity. I don't work with Python on my day-to-day job for a while now, and it gives you an opportunity to actually be in tuned with what's going on with Python and Django, but it also gives me a chance to kind of polish my scaling skills. So we have, this is pretty CPU intensive work, and we have pretty interesting traffic patterns. So I have to think about how we scale this, how we improve our availability, how I make sure we have monitoring and observability up to par.
Yeah, because I can imagine that you could, and maybe do, get a big client just comes in and crushes you with. I mean, I guess, so how does the traffic look? Is that common that out of the blue you'll just get nailed with a lot of stuff and then otherwise it's flat, or is there any consistency there?
So we, File Previews has customers around the world, and different kind of traffic patterns. So we have people doing like bulk imports of just files that they have. So sometimes we'll get 5,000 requests, one after the other, to generate previews for different kinds of files. And I guess part of the challenge is you'd handle that with scaling your instances, so you have more instances and you can kind of process the queue faster. But things like larger files, so we have customers that sometimes upload a PDF file that is like 20,000 pixels by 30,000 pixels, right? And it's kind of like it's like a giant PDF. So, those are one of those could be, could hold up the queue for a longer time. So like, we need to kind of be observing our limits, time limits, memory limits, view limits, file size limits.
Would this be a good example of a use case for serverless, like, a Lambda or a functions-based approach, or, because that kind of looks like the perfect example, right? You've got discrete jobs that can be done one by one. Would it work in that environment, or?
Yes. So I'm hoping to be able to try that. Lambda, like AWS Lambda, they have some limits to the size of what you can actually install there. So we, even though our workers run in a Docker container, you could imagine that Docker container is just like a VM. It'll be interesting to kind of split that into to be able to just fit into whatever the constraint for Lambda is. But it should definitely be possible. At this point, this is kind of my side project, and I haven't had the time. I tried porting.
The eternal story.
I tried porting a specific part of the pipeline, and it just was so like an additional complexity, like with testing and just like kind of how we would compile different dependencies that would fit into that particular environment. But yeah, it definitely seems like the thing that you could probably kind of model in that serverless like architecture.
Right. Okay. Interesting. But it's not, so there's two parts. One, yes, but the other, no. Is that, hang on, the VM gives me a lot here. I've got this whole structure.
Yeah. I spent a lot of time kind of tuning, or what we have to a particular infrastructure model, and that has solved our immediate scaling issues. So I am not, touching that much of it now.
Can I ask, currently you're working at AuthZero, is that right?
Yes, I do. I started working at OffZero as an engineer in August.
Okay, so in an earlier episode, we were talking about authentication, and I sort of said, I gave AuthZero a go, and it didn't really fit in with Django, and so, I probably wouldn't use it, and I don't know, what's the use case? So here, can I ask you to put your AuthZero hat on and tell us the AuthZero story for Django? Yeah, you got.
Yeah, you're wearing the sweatshirt.
Can you tell? So if I'm going to use AuthZero in my Django project, or I'm going to consider it, can you just give us the sales pitch? What does it give me as a Django developer?
Okay, so kind of going back to that episode where you were talking about authentication and authorization, you kind of defined those, and I think you did a very good job. And I guess one question I, as a developer of like indie small side projects using Django, I often question myself, like, why would I use AuthZero versus something like Django all-auth, right? And if we kind of think about Django's batteries included philosophy, Django does a really great work at not letting developers screw up authentication, right? There's a configurable password hashing system with really great defaults here. You don't have to think about using Bcrypt, or do I use like MD5, or it's really hard to even store like plain text passwords. And then there's this other like whole other things that third party packages kind of help with, like password strength checks and throttling, authenticating against like third party identity providers like Facebook or Google. But you, the developer, you still need to think about those security related things. You need to kind of know that you're looking for throttling of your login endpoints, and you need to install a package. After you find it, you need to configure, you need to maintain that, and whatever other kind of dependencies that might have, you might need to have a Redis server or something else, right? So AuthZero provides authentication and authorization as a service. We give developers and companies building blocks to secure their applications without having to become security experts. We provide unified device agnostic login experience. So it doesn't matter if you're working on a web app or a mobile app, you can still provide this unified login experience that looks like one single thing, right? We provide like many social identity providers. You can add custom ones too: brute force protection, breach password detection, single sign-on, passwordless login, multi-factor auth, user management, and these are all the things that you could probably find if something like Django or Django All app can't provide. You can go and find possibly a third-party package that somebody built.
Yep.
You then need to actually assess if they're well maintained, if they're well built, if they're secure. And then we go back to that, security expert thing. OffZero also does something really cool, which they allow you to write custom JavaScript code to customize any part of the authentication and authorization flow. So for example, if you wanted to enrich user profiles from data from like Clearbit, if you wanted to reuse information from another database or service, if you wanted to notify another system of like real-time logins, you can do that. So it goes back to like, Django provides you login out of the box, and you could figure out the whole template situation and set yourself. And going back to like one of the recent episodes, we were talking about patterns, and after you built 1-2 apps that have login, you'll notice the patterns, and you'll maybe have your own project templates, and but then this other like little thousands of other things around authentication, authorization, and security, you either need to be aware of, be proactive, or you'll have to be reactive after a possible incident. So either you kind of delegate all those really important security and trust aspects of your application to somebody like OffZero, or you take that on, and you need to be aware of what taking that on means.
Okay, that's a super answer. And so one thing you mentioned at the beginning of that, so there were two thoughts that came up. One was you mentioned about the side project versus the big, it's a side project. Yeah, totally. I can see why you take it on, but AuthZero surely pitches itself for big projects too, right?
Oh yeah.
It's not just for a developer site. So
yeah, so it's not only for somebody building a web app and a mobile app. We are an identity platform, right? So if you're building a single sign-on for your whole like internal infrastructure services on a large enterprise setting, AuthZero would still work for you.
Fine. And okay. And then the second thought was when I tried this a long time ago, is when AuthZero first came out, and I gave it a go and I gave it a spin. I didn't really find that it integrated with Django in the way I wanted to, in that it would do the JWT client-side authentication. I could see how that would give me the mobile app authentication. That was all super. But what I really wanted was, in my view, request.user to return an instance. So is there now a nice story about integrating with the Django project? With like remote user backend?
Yep. So we have, I feel like one of the things that attracted me to AuthZero a long time ago was their content as a marketing effort. And they have really great guides. So I was just checking out the Getting Started guide with Django. And since AuthZero actually provides an OAuth 2 API, you can use something like Django Social Auth or Django All Auth, and you would use AuthZero as an identity, right? And then you would handle in AuthZero, Facebook login and whatever. So I part of the quick start guide I was looking at does use remote user backend on the remote user middleware. And it really fits into the whole Django lingo.
Okay, that sounds super. So I think can you in the show notes we can put a link to those Getting Started guys with Django. Yeah.
Definitely.
Well, and I wanted to ask you too. So I saw on Twitter, I think just yesterday, there was just the North Bay Python conference, and Guido tweeted this thing about Jacob Kaplan-Moss, Django co-creator, saying, "Stop using passwords. Use login with Google, Facebook. Quote, Google's security team is better than yours." I'm honestly, my jaw dropped when I saw that, but I'm curious what your thoughts are as much more of a expert in this realm than I am. I just don't even know where they're coming from with that. I mean, Facebook was storing stuff in clear text. I mean, I can see OffZero, but to just hand it over to, one of the couple monopolies, to me, I just, I don't know how you feel, Carlton.
There's two parts.
I feel like I'm missing something big here.
If this is just a weekend project, then, absolutely, the more you can outsource, the best. But if your user database is a core strategic asset of your business, then you can't just hand it over to a third party. So there's that point, which is important. And our Facebook that secure? Because every time I turn on the news, it's
so crufty and creepy. I mean, Google's not much better. I mean, so with Django All-Auth, which is fantastic, I think I still have the top Google spot for a tutorial on that. And I actually deliberately don't. I think there's one maybe I showed Gmail, but I don't show Facebook because, well, here I go, never working at Facebook. I think Facebook is pretty awful, so I don't feel like doing their job for them. But we got off on a little bit of a rant. So make the case for AuthZero as opposed to like Google, Facebook. If someone just says, well, I'm just delegating my auth in either case, why is that actually incorrect?
This is interesting. So like, I think one thing to notice is that you can use AuthZero without integrating any like social identity providers, right? You don't need to use Facebook or Google or, the other 300 providers that we might have. You can use like email and password against the AuthZero database, right? I think like trust is the name of the game. It's especially when you're handling such an important path for an application as authentication is and as authorization is.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's a deep topic. I mean, one part of this, which I've seen with some services recently, is this login by email where there is no password. Every time I log in, I just put in my email address and I get a one-time link. I can see how that's more secure. It's maybe a little annoying, but I'm seeing that more and more.
Yep, that's.
But as well, you've got to bear in mind as well that a lot of people struggle with passwords. And if you can send them a link where they get a button and they can click it, tap it these days, that's actually a much better user flow. So it's arguably more secure, probably is. And, assuming the email's not compromised, but the email's the sort of golden key to all of this, isn't it?
Yeah, so that's like passwordless login, and that's something that AuthZero also allows you to do pretty easily. We since we also provide like MFA, so you can do like multi-factor authentication.
Yeah.
You can use like the Google Authenticator or Authzero or if you have to, well, you can use SMS. And I think now that we're starting to see 2FA become like something normal. It's like I wouldn't say it's like I can't get my parents to use like 2FA, and so then you can't like make that a hard requirement, right? So I can see like passwordless login not depending on your target as a UX standpoint. It might actually like hurt your user experience. I can't imagine my mom, putting in her email, if she remembers which email to use, and then like, why do I have to go to my email? And like, I found the email now. What? Oh, there's a link. So like, again, it's like it depends on your target. I can see now that there's a lot of players kind of working to improve the whole like user story for security. Like if you think about security keys, like hardware keys, passwordless login, MFA, and things like that. So I'm hoping that in the coming years we'll have a better story for all of this.
I think Django needs a better story as well. We don't have the two-factor auth built in yet, and we haven't yet got even the hooks where you would add that. Really, there are a couple of third-party solutions, but they're not. They need to be brought into Django. I think it's part of the batteries that you need to be able to plug into two-factor.
Yeah, I recently so I love the Django admin, and I never turn it off. So for file previews, I've had to kind of work around things like pagination, because at our rate, most things don't work in the Django admin. But once you get through that hurdle, it's like, okay, so now how do I hide the admin login? Because I already have this whole other login flow that I want to use and kind of funnel all traffic, if it's for our regular users or for our admin super users. And yeah, it's been a little bit clunky on that side.
The way I do that, which
I don't quite understand that.
Well,
I was just going to ask, so are you giving admin access to some users can see their previews in there? It sounds like there's 3 levels.
No, it's just me at this point.
Okay, so what I do in that environment, in that situation, is I use Nginx to lock it down to localhost, and then just SSH into the box so that it's and connect via a tunnel.
Yeah, and then if you're using Heroku, that becomes a harder.
Oh thing. Yeah, okay. Heroku's a different. But the reason I do that is because then it's not exposed on a URL and.
Yep, and most logins out there don't even have rate limiting or throttling, so you can do credential stuffing attacks, and you don't even notice.
Yeah. Well, this whole, I wonder just for OffZero, from the marketing aspect, all of this stuff sounds, the more you learn about the web, the more you go, oh my God, how scary it is. But it's, but a beginner just, wants it to work and has trouble with that. So I wonder, at what point does someone go, wow, I really need to switch over to OffZero? Is it, do they already get burned, or they're at a big company where the login is complicated? I just sort of, it feels like you almost need to get burned or be in a large enough, complicated enough organization before you go, oh wow, maybe I want some help with this.
Yep, I think right now it's kind of reactive. You've had a bad experience. Right. You've had a leak. You've had security vulnerabilities being reported to you, and I think one of the other great things that OffZero does well is, again, this is probably a marketing strategy, is putting out content that is relevant on security topics and best practices, and kind of teaching the general audience about security, and hoping that we're going to start seeing people being more proactive about this, and not having to wait to actually be on a bad position after an incident, and then having to figure, oh, maybe we should have used an identity provider, and 3 years in with millions of users, that might be a harder thing, but still possible.
Right. No, I think they have the fantastic guides on. I remember just JWTs when I was learning about that, and it's similar to what DigitalOcean has done. I think to differentiate themselves, they have fantastic content because spinning stuff up is scary for beginners. Though it does seem to me, just from a business aspect, that at the end of the day, beginners are kind of whatever. It's all about big clients. This is what I have to keep reminding myself, because even Heroku, I have Heroku in my books, and almost every day I get some sort of question around Heroku or SendGrid, Twilio, and I'm just like, why can't they be bothered to make this, friendly? And it's because they don't. I think it's because they don't really care, right? A couple newcomers isn't the same as having really good, docs as opposed to tutorials that an experienced developer at a large company can just dive in and use.
Yeah,
that's the thesis I have now. I don't know.
I can't speak to OffZero or Twilio or DigitalOcean stuff, but having worked on file previews, after some time, I've decided to cater to a specific target of users. mostly because I don't have the bandwidth to deal with a lot of like incoming beginner level leads, right? At the end of the day, they'll unfortunately they'll require a little bit more time, and kind of like not hand holding, but explaining what a webhook is and things like that. And in my experience, kind of converting that, all that invested time and resources into converting that specific user to a paying customer, the ROI is way less. So I'm kind of vague in some parts. I'm kind of vague in like some of the pricing, vague in kind of like some of the examples that we put out. And for me, that has worked. So I can definitely speak to like.
But I think that's a standard story from SaaS businesses, right? It's the few big enterprise clients, the one where you're off the end of the pricing thing and it's call us for a quote. That's where all the profit comes from.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm slow coming to this realization, but it sort of makes sense because I've always wondered. Well, so what is the stack at Auth0? Because you mentioned you're not using Python there. What sort of technologies are you using day to day?
So it's mostly Node.js. Like from the ground up, main core services have been built in Node.js, and we have tons of people that are very experienced in how to make Node scale. There are some services that are built with like Java and Go. There's some Python, I think, but it's like for some like ops related things.
ASCII, switch over to async. Just do a total rewrite, no big deal.
Yeah, I'm currently so when I joined the platform domain. So we are like the backbone of trust for our customers, but we kind of enable other developers in Auth0 to be able to be as productive as they can be. So I'm working on our untrusted code execution platform. So we basically all this code that our customers can write in JavaScript to extend like different flows of authentication authorization. We basically execute their code and kind of inject the results in different parts of the flow.
Yeah, no,
and all that.
That's a great problem though. Like because hey, give me some code. I'm not going to know what it is, and I'm going to run it on my computer. Like that's a tricky problem, no?
Yeah, doing that at scale seems hard, but I'm really excited. Like I've been here for a couple of months now, and I've learned so much from like so many smart people. And coming from a small kind of consulting and small products, the experience I've kind of gained, doing things at this scale is amazing. And that's, kind of why I wanted to switch after all these years, doing the entrepreneur thing.
Yeah, no, that's great. Well, and and this may be an ignorant question, but so it's Node. So are they using, for the web stuff, is it Express? I mean, I know the web part is just a teeny piece of it, but what is beyond Node? What is the stack? I mean, I know it's hard to define in such a big organization.
There's some Express and there's some Happy, Happy.js.
And Happy is a kind of batteries included web framework or API framework, right? It provides things like Joy for the validation and the back end, that the authentication back ends. These kind of things. You don't have to go looking for them in micro.
It's definitely a little more than Express, way less than Django. And it's. But I think that there's like work on standardization around, which one should we use when. That's all I know.
Well, I know that Brave browser, which actually I use, which is Brendan Ike involved with. Yeah, they're big on the Happy train.
Yep, and
pretty good stamp of a.
OffZero also they sponsor a lot of open source projects around authentication, identity. So before I even joined OffZero, they reached out to me one day and they, asked me if I wanted kind of them to sponsor the PyJWT library. And that's amazing. And I, learned that they do that with many other libraries. So they're actually, we use these libraries internally, and even if we don't use them, the fact that there are other developers working on this, they care about that.
That's really good.
Yeah, well, I like that they're doing the positive education approach as opposed to the fear approach. Probably because you can't fear something you don't understand. Because certainly, as a parent, I look at all the ads. They're all like, your kid might die, or you're a bad parent. Like, they're pretty unsubtle about it for a car seat or a car. So I appreciate them having that approach. I did want to ask. We're coming up on time. I think you just gave a talk at PyGotham, right? On which is that out yet? Can we link to that?
Yes, I can definitely add that to the show notes.
Can you talk about that?
So it's called Python Government and Contracts. It's a talk I gave I think September at PyGotham, and actually my partner in crime, Froilan Irizarry, he gave a version of that talk at North Bay Python.
Okay.
And that recording is also out. So, after Hurricane Maria passed through Puerto Rico, I was not in Puerto Rico at that time. And I spent weeks, if not months, without hearing from my parents. Due to infrastructure issues, that power was out, cell phone antennas were out, water, was out. And so that kind of leads to some kind of questionable contracts that were awarded to companies to kind of, supposedly rebuild infrastructure in Puerto Rico and kind of help after the destruction. The FEMA was involved in some of that. And that leads to I kind of learning about the Office of the Comptroller in Puerto Rico. They put out the contracts that government agencies award to other contractors. And kind of sometime after that, I had some questions as a civilian. I am not a investigative journalist or anything like that, but I did have some questions about, how money was being spent in particular agencies. And I kind of wanted to see, relations between, different contractors doing business as other, companies. So I basically built a project together with Froilan where we kind of took the data, we kind of pull and downloaded all this data from the Office of the Controller's website. We downloaded the actual PDF documents for the contract, and we're kind of extracting text from, kind of things that I've learned doing fault reviews. We're extracting that text, we're indexing that data, so now it can be searched and correlated. So this is kind of like a civic hacking project that I'm very passionate about. I've been working on it on and off for almost a year, and finally this year we decided to kind of talk about it because we thought it would be interesting story about kind of how we went about it. This is open source. It's built in Django REST Framework, Postgres. Our front end is like Next.js. And yeah, so I'm definitely very, very excited to keep talking about this. We're at a point where we're talking about how we can be more transparent about how this is financially sustainable. It does cost some money to run, not that much. So we want to be transparent about that and see if we need help from others. And I'm finally excited to see where this goes. I want to empower other people like me to kind of know what questions to make and kind of be able to visualize and at the end of the day, just hold accountable whoever needs to be held accountable.
These kind of things, you always see this, billions of dollars are being budgeted for rebuilding, and yet somehow on the ground, the stuff wasn't rebuilt. And well, where's that money gone? And all it takes is the light to be shone on where that money goes, and it will be spent in the right places. Whereas when there's darkness, it goes into people's pockets. So that's super.
I mean, and this would seem like the reason we talk about Hurricane Maria and how that leads up to this, and even after 2+ years after that happening, is that recently the FBI arrested a FEMA employee and the CEO of one of the companies involved in one of these contracts. So this is still relevant today, and there's ongoing investigations to multiple, some politician has a daughter working for $10,000 a month in some unrelated thing in the government, and now we're starting to see things popping up, and it's yes, we're fighting against corruption.
Super.
Well, do you know if any of these federal agencies are using your work to help in their investigations, or do they have their own tools? How does
So I don't think so. At the end of the day, the actual contracts, they are available via the Office of the Comptroller. I do know that there is some journalists kind of using this tool instead of the controller's tool, just because it sucks less, and it's you get some insights. Even at the simplest level, you get some insights of spending over time, and just doing correlation between a contractor being entered into the system with a typo, and you can still kind of search through that and see, these two contractors are the same entity. And they've been awarded this amount of money, and you can see the actual PDF there without having to download it. At the end, I wouldn't have wanted to build something like this. I would have wanted the tool put out by the Office of the Controller to be this.
Yes.
But I'm happy to have done it, and keep I spent a lot of time, kind of figuring out how to gather this data. It's definitely not open data. It's on their site somehow, and I managed to just download it very slowly and make it happen. If now I can empower, some data scientists to build cool visualizations on something else that I don't know, spending by particular geographic location by fiscal year or something like that. They can now do that without having to spend all this time and effort into actually gathering the data.
Super.
No, that's fantastic. I mean, because I, to make this about me, I spent 2 years of my life on a project with school data in the United States, where every state has all this reporting data on these various tests that everyone has to take at 3rd, 8th grade, high school, all these types of things. And I probably just got a teeny glimpse of what you had, where it's just a nightmare getting this information. I mean, first of all, some states had it online. You could just download the CSV files, like Massachusetts, California. Some states, it was like a PDF. I think it was Kansas who said I had to file a Freedom of Information Act request to get a CD with the data. And it's just, so I guess it's a combination of nobody has the ability and impetus to actually pull all these things together, and you realize how futile all these government agencies are, where they're just checking their box, and it's it doesn't even occur to anyone to use it for these broader, what if we wanted to analyze the data? What if we wanted to use it for something? They spend millions and tens of millions collecting it, and then it just goes
there's
away.
Something more deeply sinister than that, is that there are institutional biases against making the data openly available, because people in positions of power have a vested interest in keeping it quiet.
Sure.
And so it's important that people like José do the civil society stuff to bring it out into the light and call them to account. That's how democracy is maintained. That's how I'm welling up.
Yeah, well, and that's one thing I love about Django is it's, I think, unusual. Its roots in journalism and investigative journalism, from the beginning, right? I mean, Jacob worked at 18F. I mean, Simon's on a fellowship at Stanford on this. I mean, I kind of love that non-pure tech background of Django, whereas you said you wanted an easy way to display this data, and the Django part didn't stand in your way. It was the collection and all the rest.
Yeah, I mean, I keep going back to Django because I hate reinventing the wheel. I just want to get things done. And so it's I have a project template that kind of has some of my preference baked into it, and I feel so comfortable.
Yeah, no, I use that. It's one of my favorites. I'm always following the updates.
Wait, you don't use mine, Carlton?
No, yours is fine, but I use José's. Okay.
Sorry.
Competing over free tools. Yeah.
Yeah. So it goes back to not having to reinvent the wheel all the time. Like, I just want to make things and do it fast, and kind of get out the door as fast as possible. And Django and Python are the things to do that.
As we wrap up, are there any plugs you want to make for? So you have a personal site, jpadilla.com, which we'll link to. Anything around side projects or OffZero you want to mention as we head out the door? So
I mean, OffZero is always hiring. So I'll plug that link in the show notes. I'll also link to that PyGotham talk. It's something I'm really passionate about. I also set up my kind of sponsorship profile on GitHub, so I could maybe link to that. I'm hoping to kind of get back in track with some of the projects that I'm working on that I know I've kind of over time let kind of sit away and be unmaintained. And I kind of feel really bad about that because, people actually use them. So I'm hoping to, start spending some more of my free time kind of getting them back to date, especially like dropping Python 2 support.
Right, but let me just say, I just have to say that you mustn't feel guilty, because the time that you give to open source is phenomenal, and it has been phenomenal over a massively sustained period of time. You've got a life, you've got family, you've got work, you've got other commitments. The guilt is not necessary. Your work stands on its own.
Thank you.
Right. Well, again, I'm so pleased we could have you on.
My pleasure.
It was a great thrill for me to meet you in person, a year ago. So yeah, we'll links to everything. Thanks again.
Yeah. Thank you for having me.
Gracias for coming on.
Ciao.
Ciao.